Chinese letter, WHO will come to rescue you now, outsider? Sergeant Blake Harlow's words sliced through the late afternoon stillness. 23 soldiers were locked in formation on the muddy training ground. A small cloth patch bearing a national flag sailed through the air before hitting a dirty puddle. Blake wore a smile that never touched his eyes, the kind practiced over years of abusing power. Corporal Nadia Reyes stood motionless. She kept her dark eyes focused straight ahead as she knelt to retrieve the patch, the mud seeping through her uniform at the knee. The wet fabric felt heavy and cold in her grip. She rose to full attention, shoulders back, water from the patch dripping onto her polished boots. Blake moved around her in slow circles, his steps making soft, sucking sounds in the mud. "I'm talking to you, Corporal. I want to know who you think will protect you," his voice carried across the formation. "From where I stand, you have no business being here. This is not about meeting quotas. This is the United States Army." Nadia's grip on the patch tightened just slightly. Her chest moved in a precise rhythm. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4, release for 4. The pattern was nearly invisible to observers, but Gunnery Sergeant Ellis Grant, positioned 30 feet away with crossed arms and military short gray hair, caught it. His eyes narrowed the way an experienced technician's eyes narrow when machinery makes an unusual sound. Behind them stretched the obstacle course like a test of will made from steel and rope. Climbing walls stood at steep angles demanding upper body power. Hanging ropes swayed slightly. Nets stretched across frames. Barbed wire gleamed over the crawl sections. This was the proving ground where excuses died and ability mattered more than rank. Blake grabbed the patch from Nadia's hand and held it up like contaminated evidence. "You see this? This tells me everything. It tells me you arrived here because someone filled out forms and checked boxes, not because you earned your spot." He dangled the patch at arm's length. "But this is the real world now, Corporal. Nobody here is impressed by your documentation." Nadia's expression remained unchanged. Her jaw stayed firm. The breathing pattern continued, 4-4-4-4. It was the kind of composure that comes from experience from having survived worse situations. Blake mistook her quiet strength for helplessness. "Look at this," he announced to everyone. "She won't even try to argue back, just stands there frozen. Maybe that's her training, stay still and hope trouble passes you by." A few uncomfortable chuckles moved through the ranks. Not real laughter, but the kind that happens when people don't know how else to react. Private Leo Park, 23 years old with gentle eyes and a habit of adjusting his helmet, shifted his weight. He stood in the second row, near enough to see Nadia's expression, but far enough to avoid getting involved. Something about her stillness didn't sit right with him, but not the way Blake intended. She looked like stored potential, not surrender. By the equipment storage area, a civilian-dressed man named Marcus Trent made small adjustments to a camera clipped to his shirt collar. He carried a notepad and wore identification that said he was a military journalist. His stated purpose was documenting training methods for a modernization article. Nobody had given him much thought. He scribbled something while appearing to divide his attention among several groups. Blake threw the patch back at Nadia. It bounced off her chest and landed in the mud once more. "Pick that up," he commanded, "and maybe start thinking about requesting a move to something that suits you better. Supply work administration, somewhere your mistakes won't put trained soldiers at risk." Nadia bent down a second time. While reaching for the patch, she made a small adjustment to her tactical belt with her right hand. It seemed like an absent gesture anyone might make. But the way her fingers curved around the nylon webbing made Gunny Ellis's eyes widen a fraction. He'd seen that exact grip before, in very particular situations that had nothing to do with standard training courses. It was the controlled precision of someone who had handled tactical equipment when errors were measured in split seconds. The patch was now covered in mud, nearly impossible to identify. Nadia wiped it carefully on her sleeve, then placed it in her cargo pocket. Blake watched with visible satisfaction, reading her care as emotional weakness he could exploit further. "First drill," Blake announced, turning to address everyone. "Rope climb, 30 feet with full equipment completed in under 90 seconds. This is a standard warm-up." He paused deliberately. "Corporal Reyes will go first." The challenge hung in the air. The rope climb had a reputation. 30 feet of rough hemp that burned hands and tested grip endurance. Under 90 seconds was possible for well-trained soldiers. For someone carrying the burden of public shame with hands that might shake from stress or held back anger, it was designed to confirm Blake's story. Nadia approached the rope without hesitation. Her movements were efficient and purposeful. She removed her jacket and folded it with precision, showing a tight, long-sleeved undershirt that revealed toned but not bulky muscle. As she reached up to test the rope, the fabric shifted slightly at her left wrist, just enough to show the edge of medical tape, the kind used for fresh wounds or, alternatively, for concealing things. Leo noticed. He pulled out his phone as if checking the time, but his camera application was already running. He wasn't certain why he felt compelled to record this, only that his instincts were screaming that what happened next would matter. Blake made a show of checking his stopwatch. "Whenever you're ready, Corporal." Nadia took hold of the rope. Her hands settled into position with unconscious skill. Left hand high, right hand at chest height, feet already preparing to wrap and lock. It was the technique of someone who had climbed under duress, who had gone up ropes while carrying wounded teammates or while enemy fire made every second critical. "Go." She rose smoothly. The first 10 feet vanished in powerful, controlled movements. Her legs did most of the work, wrapping and locking in a technique called the J-hook that shifted weight and saved arm strength. 15 feet, 20 feet. Her breathing stayed controlled, 4, 4, 4, 4. Even as her muscles burned, she kept the rhythm, 25 feet. Blake's stopwatch showed 41 seconds. When Nadia touched the top beam, she came down in smooth, controlled descents, her hands managing friction rather than fighting it. Her boots hit the ground at 1 minute 8 seconds. She stepped back and stood at attention, barely breathing hard. Complete silence filled the formation. This wasn't just adequate performance. It was textbook perfection, the kind that comes from countless repetitions under real pressure, from having done this when it actually mattered instead of in a safe training setting where failure meant embarrassment rather than death. Blake's jaw tightened. "Lucky attempt," he said dismissively. "The rope was probably still dry from being stored inside." He scanned the group. "Private Cross, Private Diaz, you're up next." As the drill went on, Blake pulled out his phone and typed quickly. The message went to a chat labeled Training Staff, though everyone understood it was really just Blake and his loyal circle, 3 soldiers who had learned that agreeing with Blake made life easier and disagreeing made it complicated. The message said, "Rays exceeded expectations on rope climb. Must adjust difficulty parameters for proper evaluation." It sounded professional, like a trainer making legitimate modifications based on observed capability. But Specialist Derek Cole, reading the message from his spot near the equipment storage, understood the real meaning perfectly. He glanced at the rope climb area, then at the container where backup ropes were stored, and gave a knowing nod. Marcus continued his note-taking. To anyone watching, he was simply recording training activities, writing down times, documenting procedures, capturing mundane details that fill military publications. But the audio device in his collar was recording every word Blake spoke, and the camera was documenting every interaction, every moment of public degradation that would later need to be cataloged and verified. The formation cycled through exercises for 90 minutes. Wall traverses where soldiers moved sideways across vertical surfaces using only small grips. Low crawls under barbed wire where mud and exhaustion made every forward movement feel impossible. Cargo net climbs that tested coordination while tired. Nadia finished each task with mechanical efficiency. Never first, never last, always precisely in the middle where competence doesn't draw attention. But small details accumulated like evidence. When she tied her boots before the low crawl, she used a specific pattern. 2 loops with reinforced knots at the ankle that Leo recognized from an airborne manual he'd studied. When she adjusted her knee pads, the way she checked the strap tension was oddly precise, the kind of check done by someone who knows equipment failure could mean more than just a scraped knee. And when Blake walked past during a water break, she tracked him with her peripheral vision while keeping her head forward, the subtle awareness of someone trained to monitor threats without appearing to. Gunny Ellis moved closer to Leo during the next rotation. "Park," he said quietly, his voice gravelly from decades of shouting commands. "You see anything unusual about Corporal Reyes?" Leo hesitated, uncertain if this was a test. Gunny Ellis had a reputation for being fair but also intensely loyal to command. "Sir, I don't want to say the wrong thing." "I'm not asking you to say anything wrong. I'm asking you to observe." Gunny Ellis nodded toward Nadia, who stood near the cargo nets. "That way she stands, how she distributes her weight. I've seen it before, but not in basic training courses." "Where, sir?" Gunny Ellis didn't answer right away. His eyes had gone distant, pulled by memory. "In combat zones," he finally said, "in places where standing incorrectly could get you killed." He refocused on Leo. "Keep what you notice to yourself for now, but keep noticing." The afternoon sun started sinking toward the horizon, throwing long shadows across the obstacle course. Fatigue was spreading. Soldiers moved slower, responses lagged, mistakes multiplied. This was when accidents happened, when equipment failures combined with human error to create situations that spiraled out of control. Blake called everyone back together. His uniform somehow remained crisp despite the heat and humidity, as if he'd been watching from air conditioning rather than standing in the mud. "Final drill," he announced. "Timed obstacle course, complete circuit. Each soldier runs individually and will be evaluated. Times will be posted publicly." He let that sink in. "Corporal Reyes goes first." A murmur moved through the ranks. Going first meant setting the standard before anyone knew what a good time looked like. It also meant running on fresh obstacles before mud accumulated on grips and ropes got slick. The advantages and disadvantages balanced out, but the choice itself was pointed. Blake wanted Nadia visible, wanted her performance to be the measuring stick for everyone else. Nadia approached the starting line. The full circuit included everything: rope climb, wall traverse, cargo nets, low crawl, balance beams over water, and a final sprint. Finishing under military standards required 6 minutes. Excellence required 5 or less. Anything over 7 was failure. As Nadia checked her equipment one final time, Marcus repositioned for a better angle. His camera would capture the entire run from beginning to end. His notepad was already full of observations, timestamps, and contextual notes that would matter more than anyone currently understood. "Ready," Blake said, stopwatch prepared. Nadia crouched at the line. Her breathing shifted from the calm 4444 to something faster, preparing her body for explosive effort. Her fingers dug into the mud seeking purchase. Her eyes locked on the first obstacle, and everything else became tactically irrelevant. "Go!" She launched forward. The rope was in her hands within 3 seconds, and she was climbing before most observers finished processing the start. 12 seconds to the top, 18 back down. She hit the ground and immediately transitioned to the wall traverse, mud flying from her boots. The traverse required moving 15 feet sideways across a vertical wall using only fingertip holds. Nadia attacked it with controlled aggression, her movements precise but fast, shifting weight from hold to hold with minimal wasted motion. 31 seconds total when she dropped from the final hold and sprinted to the cargo nets. Cargo nets were deceptive. They looked easier than rope climbs because they offered multiple contact points. But the flexibility meant every movement created instability. Soldiers who rushed made the net swing, wasting energy fighting momentum. Nadia climbed steadily, always maintaining 3 points of contact, reaching the top in 19 seconds and coming down in 14. 1 minute, 4 seconds total. She was ahead of pace for an excellent rating by 16 seconds. The low crawl was where many soldiers lost time. 30 yards under barbed wire strung 18 inches above mud. Going fast risked cuts from the wire. Going too slow burned time and energy. Nadia dropped flat and began pulling herself forward with her elbows, legs driving in rhythmic pushes. Her body profile was so low the wire never touched her back. 43 seconds later, she emerged on the other side, mud coating her from face to boots. 2 minutes, 11 seconds total, still ahead. The balance beams came next. 3 8-inch-wide beams set over water. Each beam 12 feet long with 6 inches of separation. Nadia didn't hesitate or slow down. She ran across the first beam like it was solid ground, used momentum to jump to the second, crossed it, jumped to the third. 9 seconds. 2 minutes, 20 total. Final obstacle, the sprint, 100 yards flat out to the finish line. But something went wrong. As Nadia rounded the turn toward the sprint lane, her right boot caught on something, not a rock or root. Those would be visible, something deliberate. A thin wire strung at ankle height, nearly invisible against the mud, positioned exactly where a runner at full speed would hit it. She went down hard. Her momentum carried her forward into a roll. She came up on one knee, breathing hard, disoriented for the first time all day. Blood ran from a scrape on her palm where she'd caught herself. The clock kept ticking. Blake's expression was carefully neutral, but satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. "Obstacle failure," he called out. "Clock continues." Nadia pushed to her feet and completed the sprint. When she crossed the finish line, the stopwatch read 3 minutes, 47 seconds. Slower than expected given her earlier performance, but still well within acceptable range. But Blake was shaking his head. I saw a violation, Corporal. You failed to properly clear the beam transition. That's an automatic 90-second penalty. He made a show of consulting a clipboard. Added to your final time, 5 minutes 17 seconds. That's a failure. Everyone in formation knew this was manufactured. Multiple soldiers had seen the entire run. There was no beam violation. But Blake was a sergeant with authority, and contradicting him meant consequences that extended far beyond a single training day. Leo's fingers tightened around his phone. He had the entire run on video, including the moment Nadia went down. The wire was barely visible in the footage, but it was there if you knew where to look. He started to step forward to offer the evidence, but Gunny Ellis's hand came down on his shoulder. "Not yet," the older man said quietly. "Sometimes a trap needs to close completely before it can be proven." Blake posted the times on a board near the equipment shed. Nadia's false failure was listed first, highlighted in red. "Let that be a lesson," he told everyone. "Standards exist for a reason. Shortcuts don't work." His gaze found Nadia. "Maybe you should think about whether this assignment is the right fit for you, Corporal." Nadia stood at attention, silent. The mud on her uniform was starting to dry into gray crust. The blood on her palm had smeared across her fingers. Her breathing had returned to the 4444 pattern, controlled and deliberate despite having just completed a course that should leave anyone gasping. As the formation dispersed, soldiers scattered to barracks, the dining hall, the exchange. Small groups formed and dissolved, conversations happening in hushed voices. Derek Cole intercepted Blake near the equipment shed, and they exchanged words too quiet for anyone else to hear. Seth Vance and Ivan Cross joined them moments later, forming a tight cluster that radiated exclusivity and shared purpose. Marcus packed his camera and notepad with unhurried efficiency. Before leaving, he made eye contact with Nadia for exactly 2 seconds. No expression crossed his face. No signal was given, but something passed between them, an acknowledgement that existed outside spoken language. Gunny Ellis watched all of this from his position near the barracks entrance. His weathered face showed nothing, but his mind was cataloging details, building a picture that didn't match the official story. That stance, that breathing, that grip on the rope, and now that controlled response to public humiliation and manufactured failure. This wasn't a soldier struggling to meet standards. This was someone playing a role so completely that only the details gave her away. The sun touched the horizon, painting the obstacle course in shades of gold and rust. Equipment cast long shadows. The mud began to cool. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations, new manufactured failures, new opportunities for Blake to prove Nadia didn't belong. But somewhere in the gathering darkness, pieces were moving on a board Blake couldn't see. Cameras had recorded what needed recording. Witnesses had seen what needed seeing. And the woman at the center of it all continued her performance of silence and submission, breathing in patterns that military psychologists linked to combat stress management, moving with economy that comes from environments where wasted motion means wasted life. The following day arrived with gray skies promising rain that never came. Morning formation happened at 6:30. Soldiers stood in precise rows while the national anthem played from speakers. Blake walked the ranks, inspecting uniforms, noting deficiencies. When he reached Nadia, he stopped. "Corporal, your boots are improperly tied." She looked down. Her boots were tied exactly to specification. "And your name tape is crooked." It wasn't. But 2 nearby soldiers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the pattern. Blake was building a case, accumulating minor infractions that individually meant nothing but collectively created a narrative of incompetence. After formation, the unit moved to the dining facility. Nadia sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating, focused on her meal rather than the conversations around her. Derek Cole sat 3 tables away, phone in hand. He opened the training staff chat and uploaded a photo of Nadia sitting isolated. The caption read, "Day 2. Subject continues to show poor unit integration." Within minutes, the photo was shared to other chats, altered slightly in each version. By the time it reached soldiers who weren't present at yesterday's obstacle course, Nadia had become the diversity hire who couldn't measure up, the foreigner who thought she was special, the weak link who would get someone killed. None of it was true. All of it was effective. Lieutenant Karen Ortiz received a message during her morning coffee. She was 32, 3 years out of West Point, trying to build a reputation as someone who led through competence rather than connections. The message was from Blake, marked urgent, with an attached video clip. The clip showed Nadia's fall during the sprint, edited to remove the moment her boot caught the wire. What remained looked like simple clumsiness, a failure of coordination. The timestamp was accurate. The footage was real. The context was entirely manufactured. LT, we need to discuss Corporal Ray's safety concern. Second incident this week. Protocol requires intervention. Ortiz watched the clip 3 times, trying to reconcile what she saw with the service record she'd reviewed when Nadia transferred. That record showed competence, even excellence, but records could be misleading. Politics could influence evaluations, and if there was genuinely a safety issue, Ortiz's responsibility was clear. She typed back, "I'll review with Ray's after morning training." "Keep documenting." Blake read the response and allowed himself a small smile. Documentation, the foundation of every successful campaign. And he had plenty, carefully selected, strategically edited, presented with just enough truth to make the lies invisible. Morning training was scheduled at the shooting range. 20 firing lanes, each with steel targets at various distances. This was where marksmanship was tested, where breathing control and trigger discipline separated expert ratings from basic qualifications. Nadia drew lane 7. She signed out an M4 carbine, conducted a function check with practiced efficiency, and loaded magazines. The range safety officer called the line to ready. Nadia assumed a standing position, rifle to shoulder, breathing slowing. Her left hand gripped the forward rail with fingers aligned, thumb over bore, exactly the grip Gunny Ellis had noticed yesterday. "Range is hot," the safety officer announced. "Fire when ready." The crack of rifle fire filled the air. 20 soldiers engaging targets simultaneously. Brass casings arcing through sunlight. The smell of gunpowder mixing with morning dew. Nadia fired in controlled pairs. 2 rounds, breathe, assess, 2 more rounds. Her targets rang with metallic impacts. Blake stood behind the line with binoculars, watching for mistakes he could document. But her performance was frustratingly competent. Every round found steel. Her transitions between targets were smooth. Her weapon handling was textbook. Ivan Cross stood 3 lanes away. He glanced at Blake, received an almost imperceptible nod, and waited for his opportunity. It came during a reload while Nadia's rifle was pointed downrange but empty. Ivan deliberately knocked his magazine off the firing line. It hit the ground near Nadia's boots. "Sorry," he said, reaching down. But as he bent, his elbow jostled Nadia's rifle case, knocking it over. The case spilled open, dumping cleaning supplies and tools into the dirt. It was clumsy and obvious, but it accomplished the goal, creating a distraction during a hot range. "Cease fire," the safety officer called immediately. "Corporal Ray's, secure your equipment." Nadia knelt to gather the scattered items quickly but carefully. Blake appeared at her shoulder. "Corporal, failing to secure equipment during a hot range is a serious violation." "The case was secured, Sergeant. It was knocked over." "Are you saying Private Cross deliberately sabotaged your equipment?" It was a trap. If Nadia accused Ivan, she looked paranoid. If she accepted responsibility, she was admitting to a safety violation. Either way, Blake added it to his growing documentation. Nadia chose silence. She repacked the case, secured it with extra attention, and returned to her firing position. The range went hot again. She completed her qualification with a score of 38 out of 40, well above minimum standards but not perfect enough to be noteworthy. Lunch passed in tense silence. Nadia ate alone again, though Leo Park sat 1 table closer than yesterday, a small gesture of solidarity. Marcus was absent from the dining facility, but his car was still in the parking lot. Observant soldiers might have noticed he was photographing equipment storage areas, supply records posted on bulletin boards, things that had nothing to do with training modernization. Afternoon brought mandatory briefings: sexual harassment prevention, operational security, resilience training. Nadia sat in the back row of each session, taking notes no one else bothered to take, her attention apparently focused on presenters reading slides about policies they barely understood. But during the operational security briefing, something shifted. The instructor mentioned chain of custody for sensitive equipment, proper procedures for reporting missing gear, the importance of documentation when irregularities were discovered. It was dry material, the kind that made eyelids heavy. Nadia's pen moved across her notepad. To anyone watching, she was just taking detailed notes. But if someone looked closely, and later someone would, they'd see she wasn't transcribing the presentation. She was listing equipment from the obstacle course, noting discrepancies between what was supposed to be available and what was actually present. A rope that should have been replaced last month but was still in service. Harnesses missing inspection tags. a storage container listed as empty on the manifest, but clearly containing something based on the padlock securing it. Seth Vance sat 3 rows ahead, scrolling through his phone, searching for Nadia's social media presence. Everyone had something embarrassing online, old photos, questionable opinions, associations that looked bad. But Nadia's digital footprint was oddly minimal. A Facebook account with no posts, Instagram never used. LinkedIn showed her military service and nothing else. This absence was itself suspicious to Seth. The complete lack of personal information didn't read as privacy-conscious. It read as scrubbed, as carefully curated as the online presence of someone who didn't want to be found. He sent a message to the group chat. Reyes has no social media history. Something's off. Derek replied, maybe she's just boring. Blake's response came 30 seconds later, or maybe she's hiding something. Keep digging. The briefings ended at 1600. Soldiers dispersed to personal time. The gym, the barracks, anywhere that wasn't mandatory. Nadia walked to the base library, a small building most soldiers forgot existed. She checked out a technical manual on equipment maintenance and sat in a corner with her back to the wall, positioned where she could see both entrances. Gunny Ellis found her there an hour later. He pulled a chair across from her but didn't sit immediately, asking permission through gesture. She nodded once. "You read a lot, Corporal." His tone was conversational. "When I have time, Gunnery Sergeant." That's pretty dry material for pleasure reading. I like to stay current on procedures. Ellis finally sat. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her the way a jeweler studies a stone, looking for flaws or authenticity. "I noticed something yesterday," he said eventually. "The way you tie your boots, that's airborne standard, isn't it?" "I've had various training, Gunnery Sergeant." "I'm sure you have," he leaned back. "Equipment maintenance procedures, specifically documentation requirements for gear that goes missing or gets damaged." He met her eyes. Interesting choice. Nadia didn't respond. She simply returned to reading. But there was an awareness in her posture now, a recognition that Ellis saw more than most. "I've been in this army 28 years, Ellis continued. "Deployed 6 times, saw things that don't make it into official reports, met people who weren't exactly what their uniform said they were." He stood, preparing to leave. "You remind me of some of those people, Corporal. The way you move, the way you breathe, the way you let things happen without fighting back." "Is there something you need to tell me, Gunnery Sergeant?" "No, just an observation." He paused at the door. "But here's another observation. Sometimes people who look weak are actually the most dangerous ones in the room. Sometimes silence is the loudest weapon." He tipped his head slightly. "You have a good evening, Corporal Reyes." After he left, Nadia continued reading for another 30 minutes. Then she returned the manual, checked out 2 more. One on communication security protocols and one on proper procedures for filing official complaints through military channels, and walked back to the barracks as daylight faded. Her room was small and Spartan, temporary quarters assigned to soldiers awaiting permanent housing. A bed, a desk, a locker, a single window overlooking the obstacle course. She set the manuals on the desk and began removing her uniform, careful and methodical, hanging each item precisely. The medical tape at her left wrist had begun to peel. She removed it slowly, revealing not a wound but the edge of something else. A line of ink, blue-green, part of a larger design that extended up her forearm beneath the long-sleeved undershirt she never removed. She didn't look at it, didn't examine it or trace its lines. She simply applied new tape, covering it completely, and pulled on civilian clothes before sitting at the desk to write in a notebook she kept locked in her personal safe. The entries were dated, time-stamped, detailed, incidents cataloged with precision that would satisfy any legal review. Blake's comments verbatim when possible, witnesses present, context, and circumstances. The growing pattern of harassment documented in ink that would never fade or be conveniently lost. At 2100, her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number, 72 hours elapsed. Phase 1 documented. Continue protocol. She didn't reply. She never replied. She simply deleted the message and returned to her notebook, adding one more entry to the growing chronicle of calculated cruelty. The next morning brought mandatory physical training. The unit formed up in pre-dawn darkness, breath visible in cool air, soldiers still shaking off sleep. Blake led the formation through stretches, then announced a 5-mile run in full kit. The route took them through base roads, past motor pools and administrative buildings, ending back at the barracks. pace was set by Blake, who had a reputation for pushing speed until someone fell out. Nadia ran in the middle of the pack, neither struggling nor excelling. Her breathing remained controlled, her stride economical. The gear bounced against her back with each footfall, but she'd adjusted the straps to minimize movement. At mile 3, Blake called for double time. The formation accelerated, soldiers breathing harder, sweat soaking through uniforms despite cool temperature. This was where the run stopped being conditioning and started being punishment, where fitness requirements gave way to dominance displays. Mile 4 and Private Collins fell out, cramping. Blake didn't slow. Protocol said a soldier should stay with anyone who fell behind, but Blake interpreted protocol loosely. Collins limped to the roadside, hands on knees, gasping. Nadia glanced back once, just a flicker of attention. Then she made a decision. She dropped back, leaving the formation, and reached Collins. "Can you walk?" "Just need a minute," Collins wheezed. "We don't have a minute. Lean on me." She got her shoulder under Collins's arm, and they moved together, slower than the formation but faster than Collins could manage alone. It cost Nadia energy she couldn't spare. It meant arriving after everyone else. It guaranteed Blake's attention. They reached the finish line 4 minutes after the formation. Blake was waiting, stopwatch prominent. "Corporal Reyes, you fell out." "Negative, Sergeant. I stayed with Private Collins per buddy team protocol." "Private Collins fell out. You were not assigned as his buddy for this exercise. The manual specifies that any soldier—" "I know what the manual says, Corporal. I also know that freelancing during formation exercises shows poor judgment and undermines unit cohesion." He made a note on his clipboard. "You're both on report for failure to complete PT requirements. We'll see how the lieutenant views your independent decision-making." Collins started to protest, but Nadia squeezed his shoulder gently, a silent message. Let it go. Fighting now accomplished nothing except giving Blake more ammunition. Later that morning, Lieutenant Ortiz called Nadia to her office. The space was small and neat, decorated with certificates and photos from West Point. Ortiz sat behind her desk. Nadia stood at attention in front of it, the power dynamic reinforced by furniture. "Corporal Reyes, I've received multiple reports about your performance over the past 72 hours. Ortiz's tone was professional, but uncertainty lay underneath. She wanted to be fair, but she also wanted to trust her senior enlisted. And Blake had seniority and experience that Nadia lacked. "Sergeant Harlow has documented concerns about your ability to meet training standards, safety violations, failure to complete PT, poor equipment discipline." Nadia said nothing. Her gaze was fixed on the wall behind Ortiz, her posture perfect, her silence absolute. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" "No, ma'am." Ortiz frowned. She'd expected explanation, justification, the kind of back and forth that would help her determine truth. But Nadia's refusal to engage made the situation more difficult. "I'm placing you on administrative review pending further evaluation. You're restricted from participating in official obstacle course qualifications until we can verify your capabilities through alternative assessment." "Understood, ma'am." "That means you're off the roster for next week's certification trials. I know you just transferred here, and I know this isn't the start you wanted, but safety has to come first." "Yes, ma'am." Ortiz dismissed her, feeling simultaneously like she'd done the right thing and made a terrible mistake. The cognitive dissonance settled in her stomach uncomfortably. Outside the office, Blake was waiting. Not obviously, he was 30 feet away talking to Derek about something unrelated, but his attention was focused on Nadia's door. When she emerged, his eyes tracked her movement. Derek followed his gaze. "Think she'll quit?" "Doesn't matter if she quits or gets discharged. Either way, problem solved." Blake checked his watch. "Make sure word spreads about her restriction. I want everyone to know she's not qualified for certification." The news moved through the unit quickly. By lunch, everyone knew Corporal Reyes was off the certification roster. Interpretations varied. Some thought it unfair, others thought it necessary. Most just accepted it as reality. Nadia spent the afternoon on administrative tasks, organizing supply rooms, updating inventory spreadsheets, the mind-numbing work that keeps units functioning but earns no recognition. She performed each task with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Marcus appeared in the supply room at 1400. "Corporal Reyes, I'm doing a follow-up piece on training procedures. Mind if I ask a few questions?" She glanced up from the inventory list. I'm not authorized to speak to media without clearance from public affairs, sir. Of course, I already have clearance from your command, just general questions about equipment maintenance procedures. He moved closer, his voice dropping slightly. For instance, I've noticed some discrepancies in your unit's gear accountability, items listed as present that don't appear to be in the location specified. Nadia's pen paused for half a second, such a small tell that anyone not watching specifically for it would miss it entirely. I wouldn't know about that, sir. I'm new to the unit. Right, new to the unit. Marcus wrote something in his notebook. But you've been doing inventory work. Surely you've noticed if equipment is missing or incorrectly documented. Any concerns about equipment should be reported through proper channels, sir. Of course, he closed his notebook. One more thing, I noticed you have medical tape on your wrist, training injury. Just prevention, sir. Old injury that acts up sometimes. I see. Marcus studied her for a long moment. His expression revealed nothing, but something passed between them again, that wordless acknowledgement that they were both playing roles in a performance with an audience that didn't yet know it was watching. Well, thanks for your time, Corporal. Good luck with your review. After he left, Nadia returned to inventory work, but her hand drifted unconsciously to the tape at her wrist, pressing it down to ensure complete coverage. Whatever was hidden there remained hidden, at least for now. Evening formation happened at 1700. The unit stood at attention while Blake read announcements about upcoming training schedules, policy changes, administrative requirements. At the end, he added one more item. Corporal Reyes has been placed on administrative review and is restricted from certification trials pending evaluation. This decision was made in the interest of unit safety and reflects concerns about her ability to meet operational standards. He let the words hang in the air, official and damning. That is all, dismissed. The formation broke. Soldiers dispersed in clusters, conversations starting immediately. Nadia walked alone to the barracks, but Leo Park caught up to her before she reached the door. Corporal, I wanted to say, he hesitated, choosing words carefully. I think what happened isn't right. I saw the run yesterday. You helped Collins when you didn't have to. That took guts. Thank you, Private. I also saw the obstacle course, the wire. I got it on video if you need it. Nadia stopped walking. She turned to face Leo fully, and for the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition that an asset had declared itself. I appreciate that, Private Park. Hold on to that video, but don't show it to anyone without proper authorization. Who would authorize it? You'll know when the time comes. She continued into the barracks, leaving Leo standing in the gathering dusk with his phone in his pocket and questions multiplying in his mind. Inside, Nadia checked her messages. Another text from the unknown number, Phase 1 complete, documentation sufficient, prepare for escalation. Phase 2 begins tomorrow at 800. She deleted the message. Then she pulled out her notebook and wrote one more entry dated and time-stamped, Day 3. Restriction implemented. Blake's confidence high. All pieces moving as predicted, ready for next phase. The handwriting was steady, the breathing controlled, and somewhere in the background, pieces continued moving on a board Blake couldn't see, setting up an endgame he didn't know he was playing. Night settled over the base. Lights glowed in barracks windows. Soldiers relaxed, decompressed, prepared for tomorrow. In Building 7B, a storage facility on the edge of the obstacle course, a padlock hung on a container that was supposed to be empty. Inside that container, if anyone were to look, they'd find equipment listed as missing, gear that was supposed to be in the armory, items that shouldn't exist in any official inventory. But nobody looked because nobody had reason to suspect, because Blake had been careful, and his network had been loyal, and the system had too many blind spots to catch every violation. At least that's what he believed. And tomorrow, when Phase 2 began, that belief would be tested in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate. The next morning arrived with the kind of silence that precedes storms. Formation at 800 was routine. Soldiers in neat rows, uniforms pressed, boots polished. Blake conducted inspection with his usual theatrical precision, finding fault where none existed. When he reached Nadia, he didn't speak immediately. He circled her slowly, examining her uniform from every angle. Corporal, your name tape is faded, doesn't meet visual standards. The tape was identical to everyone else's. Same color, same wear pattern, same regulation compliance. But Blake had stopped caring about truth. You'll replace it by tomorrow's formation. Failure to maintain proper uniform standards will result in additional corrective action. He moved on without waiting for acknowledgement. Formation dismissed. Blake pulled Derek, Ivan, and Seth aside near the motor pool. His voice was low. Today we finish this. I want documented evidence that Rays can't handle combat-adjacent scenarios. Set up scenario training in Building 12. Make it look legitimate, but ensure she fails. He looked at each of them. And make sure there are witnesses who will support our version. Derek nodded slowly. What kind of scenario? First aid under pressure. Equipment malfunction during critical response. Something that looks like poor judgment rather than sabotage. Blake checked his watch. I'll have Lieutenant Ortiz observe. She's already questioning Rays' competence. One more failure and she'll approve the transfer request I'm drafting. They separated, moving to their assigned tasks. This wasn't the first time Blake had orchestrated someone's removal. He'd refined the process over years, learned what evidence convinced officers, what documentation satisfied regulations, what patterns of failure made discharge inevitable. What he hadn't learned was that sometimes the person being removed was documenting everything just as carefully, building evidence, waiting for the moment to strike. Building 12 was a training facility designed for scenario-based exercises, medical emergencies, equipment failures, tactical decision-making under stress. It was equipped with mannequins, props, monitoring equipment, and observation windows. At 1000, Nadia received notification to report for scenario evaluation. The message came through official channels, signed by Lieutenant Ortiz. Nothing suggested anything except routine training assessment. She arrived at 10:30. Blake was waiting outside with a clipboard. Corporal Rays, you'll be evaluated on emergency medical response. You'll have 15 minutes to stabilize a simulated casualty with multiple injuries. Performance will be observed and documented. Understood. Understood, Sergeant. Lieutenant Ortiz will observe from the control room. I'll be your safety officer during the scenario. He gestured toward the building. Equipment is staged inside. You may begin when ready. Nadia entered the building. The scenario room was set up to resemble a field environment. Debris scattered across the floor, lighting dimmed, a mannequin positioned to represent a casualty with visible wounds marked in red. Medical supplies were arranged on a table 10 feet away. Tourniquets, bandages, airway equipment. Through the observation window, Lieutenant Ortiz watched with crossed arms. Beside her stood Marcus, his camera recording. His presence was explained as continued documentation. Nobody questioned it. Blake's voice came through the speaker system. Scenario begins now. Casualty has sustained shrapnel wounds to the leg and abdomen. Possible airway compromise. Respond appropriately. Nadia moved immediately to the mannequin. Her hands assessed injuries with practiced efficiency, checking for breathing, identifying life-threatening wounds, prioritizing interventions. She reached for a tourniquet and began application to the leg wound, her movements precise and confident. But something was wrong with the tourniquet. The windlass rod, the component used to tighten the device, wouldn't engage properly. It had been sabotaged, the threading damaged just enough that it appeared functional until actually used under pressure. Nadia didn't hesitate. She abandoned the faulty tourniquet and improvised using a cravat bandage, creating a makeshift tourniquet with available materials. It wasn't textbook, but it was effective, demonstrating adaptability under equipment failure. Blake's voice cut through the speaker. Corporal, you failed to use proper equipment. Improvised solutions are not acceptable in standard protocols. She didn't respond. She was already moving to address the abdominal wound, packing it with gauze, applying pressure, maintaining focus on keeping the simulated casualty stable. Her breathing remained controlled, 4-4-4-4, even as time pressure mounted and Blake's criticisms continued. In the observation room, Ortiz frowned. She's actually doing well considering the equipment failure. Is that tourniquet supposed to be malfunctioning? Marcus leaned forward slightly. Interesting question, Lieutenant. Perhaps we should verify the equipment after the scenario. 8 minutes into the scenario, Nadia had stabilized both major wounds and was checking for additional injuries when Blake entered the room. His arrival wasn't part of standard protocol, but he was carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression of professional concern. Corporal, you need to move faster. In a real scenario, this casualty would have bled out.